Coach Robb podcast, answering questions and eliminating frustrations about health, wellness, and performance since 1987.
Welcome to the Coach Robb podcast, the People's Podcast. This is episode number 61. We're going to talk about a really cool topic today, and that is, what does tired really mean? I want to thank everybody for joining in on YouTube. Please make sure you hit the like and subscribe to the YouTube channel. That definitely helps us out as well. And also follow us on Instagram, the Coach Robb Podcast. We post things on there as well, so we just want to make sure you guys are in tune with what is going on with our podcast. Coach, how we doing?
Hey, I'm doing great, man. Thanks so much for carving out time. I say that at the beginning of every show because I know you're extremely busy, and I want to say thank you to everybody who's been watching these videos and spreading the word. As you and I talk about off the record, unfortunately, when we do videos like this or webinars or podcasts, the difficult part is people tend to only listen to it when the pain point really resonates with them. So thank you for all those that are spreading the word. And we look forward to diving into a subject that I think a lot of people misunderstand. And that's the idea that we're tired. Are we tired physically or mentally? And I want to make sure that we can kind of clean up some of the misinformation that's floating around out there.
Yeah, and there's multiple variables that lead to being tired for riders, racers, the everyday general person. We're going to take a look at 11 specific variables today that might have a direct influence of your perception of being tired, because I think not all of us have the same, realization of what tired actually is, right? It may be that we want to take a nap. It may be, we're feeling slow, sluggish. So there's different variations of that. If you guys, listeners, if you can logistically get your Garmin dashboard updated prior, to listening to the podcast, get everything updated, this might hit home a little bit easier for you. You might be able to take a look at some of that data that Coach is going to talk about and hopefully help you.
Yeah, that's the name of the game. If you're new to our webinars and you're new to our podcast platform, what we always want you to understand is we're not just going to shed light on the problem. Our goal is always to provide a solution. The other thing that we want to do is always help the listener understand the why behind it. As you just articulated, Dan, a lot of people wake up in the morning and their first thought is, man, I'm tired. And I think people have a tendency to think that being tired means it's because you didn't sleep 8 or 9 hours. Could that be a component of it? Absolutely. And we'll take a deep dive, of course, into sleep. But there's 5 or 6 other ancillary components that, as you and I tease about, I think a lot of times people walk over $1 to pick up a penny. And as you collect data, and for those of you that are new, I'm very partial to the Garmin platform because it is so user-friendly. We have a link in our description box below. I would encourage you to pick up a Garmin watch. Not that we're trying to give you a sales pitch. We just want to equip you with the best, easy to use, most detailed and accurate platform that we possibly can. So when you wake up in the morning and you say, I'm tired, a lot of people it's got to be my sleep. And that's one component, but we're going to expose some other things around that. And the cool part is it requires no resources other than time and attention. And that's why I hope everybody's got a piece of paper and they're ready to take some notes. If you've got your Garmin dashboard open, I'll walk you through a few areas to take a look at. But when we get done with the concept, I always want our listeners to be able to take the concept, add their data, and then disseminate the information, because we always want to have a plan of attack. Not just talk about it, explain it, and then have some definitive plan that we can follow to turn these negative symptoms around. Today, the negative symptom happens to be fatigue. And we'll look at it both on a daily basis, and we'll look at it at an athletic basis if athleticism is part of your everyday, priority.
Let's get into the first one, the first variable. And this goes for everybody. This is not just hardcore athletes. This is not, the hardcore triathlon or the motocross guy. This is everybody. This applies to, the everyday person, whether or not you're working out 5 days a week or not. But the first variable is sleep. And that's probably, Coach, the the one that most people would go to, right? When they're thinking about feeling tired, is, man, I didn't get enough sleep. So can you talk a little bit about the quality and the quantity of sleep and maybe some of those sleep cycles?
100%. When you write down on your piece of paper sleep, what I want you to do is cross it out and replace it with the word food. And the reason being is food always precedes quality of sleep. Now, I want you to think about this, because I know there's going to be some people that'll say, oh, I don't eat after 8 p.m. because my body puts it on in the form of body fat. And there's no internal clock in your inside of your lip that says, oh, you're eating an avocado and a boiled egg and it's 9 p.m. I'm going to put that on as body fat. No, it looks at how many calories have you burnt during the day and how many calories have you consumed so far today. You go, well, Rob, how is that relevant to the subject of quality and quantity of sleep, as you just asked, Dan? And that is, think about an infant. An infant who doesn't have his or her appetite satisfied, they will not sleep. That's called the hierarchy of needs. So that's why I wanted to make sure as we get this conversation started, most people think tired, they associate with sleep, and they're 100% correct. When we look at sleep, especially if you've heard me talk on other podcasts, including our own, sleep quality and quantity is imperative. Absolutely. But you will never, ever be able to get a 3-month-old baby to go to sleep if they don't go to bed with their hunger being satisfied. Now, I'm not saying gorge yourself with 3,000 calories. What I'm saying is, and this is a note that I want everybody to write down, there are only 2 macronutrients that satisfies hunger, and that's protein and fat. So when I said earlier, half an avocado and a hard-boiled egg, or 2 or 3, depending on how tall and big and bone density you have, if you think that you can bridge 8 to 9 hours of sleeping and going to bed already hungry, there's no way you're going to stay asleep through the night. So I wanted to make sure that we back the train up a little bit. Sleep is our very first variable, but it too has to be preceded with quality and quantity of food, because we need to satisfy that very fundamental need known as hunger. Now, once hunger has been satisfied, now we get to get into the quality and the quantity of the sleep. And Dan, as you alluded to, what about those sleep cycles? What about, for anybody who's done some research on their sleep information, you have essentially 3 levels of sleep. There's a 4th one, but for the sake of conversation, we're going to keep it to 3. REM 1, REM just stands for rapid eye movement. REM 1 is what rejuvenates your body at a mental level. REM 2 is transitional, which is exactly what it says. You're moving from 1 to 3. And REM 3 is where your body rejuvenates itself at a hormonal level. So for those of you that have the Garmin, just go to your landing page on your Garmin app, go down to the 7-day averages and hit the sleep button. Scroll below the bar chart and you'll be able to see in the top left-hand corner your total hours of deep sleep over the last 7 days. Bottom right is going to give you your total awake time, and bottom left is going to give you your total hours on average. So when we're looking at why am I so tired? Sure, it's very easy to say you should sleep 8 hours. But what if you are sleeping 8 hours, but the quality is not there? The very first place I want our listeners to pay attention to is, did you satisfy appetite before you went to bed? Literally, Dan, just take on the role of a 3-month-old. We would never give a 3-month-old a nice warm bath, get them in clean clothes, tuck them into their crib, and think that they're going to sleep through the night. And to put it into a slightly different perspective, none of us would go from noon until 8 p.m. and not act surprised that we were hungry. Well, what makes us think that we can go from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. and be able to sleep through the night? Because that hierarchy of needs is definitely going to bump up, and it only gets compounded when we get to the athletic component here today. When you're exercising more, once again, look at your calorie burn rate. It's astounding how many calories people burn and they don't realize it. And then when we get into the subject of food, eating healthy does not have a lot of calorie density. It's nutrient dense, but not calorie dense. And Dan, I think you can see this is why people are waking up fatigued, because they don't get the quality and the quantity because they're being woken up numerous times during the night because they're hungry. Hopefully that is a first aha epiphany for this podcast that we're doing here today.
So I'm going to bring up this so everybody knows that we are real life, true humans. that we're not robots that just eat clean and that's all we eat, right? You told me one time that you should have a bowl of high quality ice cream before you go to bed to satisfy your hunger. It's high in fat. My wife still says I'm crazy. She's still calling you a liar, Coach Robb, that you're not right. But I do not believe her because I love ice cream and it does help me sleep.
Yeah. Well, and I totally understand your wife and anybody that's listening. They're going to say, yeah, but there's sugar in that. And you're exactly right. Here's the way I look at it. When you look at something like a Haagen-Dazs bar that's high quality fat, all their ingredients are pure ingredients. I look at it, it has a twofold benefit. If you're more comfortable eating a half an avocado and 2 hard-boiled eggs, it's got fat and protein, go for it. I look at it, we all grew up as ice cream was a treat. It's a feel-good food. So now I'm getting a couple benefits. I'm getting the protein and the fat, and I get the feel-good food of ice cream. Now, on the other side of it, Dan, you bring up a good point. Let me digress for a moment, and then I'll finish that thought. I literally have worked with thousands upon thousands into almost the 50,000 range of how many individuals I've worked with over the last 38 years. I have literally tens of thousands of evidence of somebody eating ice cream before going to bed and sleeping better, and within an 8 to 10 week period having a lower percentage of body fat. This was in our general fitness weight loss division. They walked every day the same distance, the same duration, at the same heart rate. By adding ice cream before bed, the sleep quality went up, body fat went down. Now, we may have a listener that says, hey, if I eat ice cream before bed, I have gastrointestinal issues. Well, that may be a sensitivity to lactose. It's not ice cream's fault, it's the lactose. We'll have people that say, oh, I don't like that heavy feeling. Now we're getting into personal preference, not about the science of satisfying appetite to improve sleep quality. Something to contemplate.
I'm going to need you to have that one-on-one conversation with my wife, okay?
Absolutely. And I also want people to think about this. There's a really cool concept called sleep atonia, atonia. Look it up. I want you to stop and think about this, Dan. Have you ever wondered why when you go to bed at night, you may dream about jumping out of a building, riding your motorcycle, riding a skateboard, swimming, walking through the mall? You ever notice that your legs aren't moving as you dream about walking through the mall? This sleep atonia, it's a really cool, when your brain is in a true state of sleep, it's what we call sleep paralysis. You ever noticed? Your large muscles do not activate even though the brain is dreaming that you're moving around. So when you have somebody who wakes up and they're physically exhausted, it's because this is another example that they didn't get into those deeper levels of sleep. And what are we talking about today on this podcast? Waking up fatigued. Well, literally, if you've been restless all night long, this sleep atonia didn't kick in, it is a clear sign that you're not getting into those deep levels of sleep. And I want to bring that to the attention to anyone who hasn't invested in a Garmin platform. I still want to empower you with some resources on what you can look for. The other thing that we also want to look at is when you wake up in the morning, for the men, having that morning erection, that tells you that you got those deep cycles of sleep. As much as that may be a sensitive subject for some people, it's reality. If you wake up in the middle of the night and your sheets are soaking wet with sweat, and we're going to talk about this in a few minutes, but how do you know that's not a virus versus your adrenals are getting overworked? Remember, the adrenal system is what helps you deal with stress. When you don't sleep, your stress levels go up. So that's why I want, before we go any further beyond the subject of sleep, sleep can be improved if you satisfy hunger. If you find yourself sleeping deeper and deeper, ask yourself why. Once you satisfy hunger and that hierarchy of needs, again, go back to a 3-month-old child, right? It's very fundamental, but I don't know why the rules changed as we've gotten older. And I've said this on numerous podcasts, including my own in the past. When did the rules change? Now, there's going to be people that say, well, as you get older, your metabolism slows down. That's right. But that's why physical activity helps you offset those aging situations like we spoke about in the last pod. We have to stop using textbook excuses. We need to start taking responsibility. And I wouldn't make the recommendation to eat before bed if I haven't proven that it works. Not because I need to be validated that I'm right, I didn't create the desire I didn't create the hierarchy of needs associated with, if you're hungry, you won't sleep. It's just that simple.
It's the
So,
infomercials and social media, Coach Robb, that
oof,
have derailed us, and we just need to get back to the basics. Let's move
you're
on to bullet point number 2, causes of feeling tired, and that's hydration. There's hydration is huge, right? That it allows us to, stay loose, lubricated our muscles and things like that. Allows our cells to carry more oxygen. But can you talk a little bit more about being hydrated and maybe be dehydrated, and how that affects the body and causes you to feel tired?
Yeah, absolutely. I want everybody that's watching this on YouTube to look at my hands. You have the skin, and below the skin, you have the fascia. Below the fascia, you have the muscle tissue. So if you think about the ability for those 3 layers to be able to slide and glide, think about the inside, literally the internals of a muscle. If a muscle is dry, it's like 2 sponges scraping back and forth. So I want you to think about the amount of restriction, friction, how much fatigue is going to come out of you if you're walking down the street and I'm constantly having you drag me, whether I'm holding onto your shirt or I've got a rope around your waist. That extra drag fatigues you even quicker. So it's a very important variable that the listeners understand. You should have a scale in your bathroom, and I respect that a lot of people are really trepidatious to step on the scale. When you step on the scale in the morning, that number is only telling you inflammation and swelling. You should always be 3 to 5 pounds heavier, 1 to 1.5 kilos heavier every night when you go to bed, every single day. Because, Dan, that's the easiest way to be able to tell if you are properly hydrated. If you're eating fruits and vegetables, they're high in water. If you're staying hydrated during the day, we have a formula. Take your body weight in pounds, divide it by 2, and then that's how many ounces you need to consume over an 8 to 10 hour day. So if I weigh 160 pounds, that's 80 ounces. That's 8 ounces spread out over a 10-hour day. Now, what we want people to understand is friction creates heat. And this is where it's a very vicious cycle, Dan. When friction creates heat inside of a muscle because of dehydration, it causes the person to sweat more, which only causes more sweating, which then compounds the dehydrating effect. You see how this becomes a vicious cycle?
Yeah.
We may have a listener that's walking around chronically dehydrated because they're concerned that the scale went up 3 pounds this week. Well, if your scale is going up, I'll give you a case study that just happened this past week. The gentleman that started our program 8 weeks ago, he's up 13 pounds in 2 months. He's freaking out. Well, what I wanted him to understand, and I want to share this with the listeners, when your body weight is going up, is that because you're finally getting hydrated for the first time? If you just start, that's why I want the new listeners to understand. We're not going to just say, hey, in blind faith, trust us. But please put it through the litmus test. Weigh yourself in the morning and the evening. You should always be heavier at night than you were in the morning. And you notice in the morning when you wake up, you've lost that water weight. Let's imagine that you weren't focusing on being heavier every night. Most people get excited because the scale keeps going down Monday through Friday. Well, that's just chronic dehydration. What are we talking about in today's podcast? People are tired because they're dehydrated, because they're excited that the scale is going down, down, down. When you finally get somebody hydrated, they go, oh my gosh. Well, for those of you that have a piece of paper, write this number down. There's approximately 3,500 calories to a pound of fat. So if you step on the scale today and you're 2 pounds heavier than yesterday, simply look at your food log or just kind of think about it in your brain. Did you really, was your food intake a surplus of 7,000 calories? Even if you're eating Big Macs and other junk food, right? Still hard to get a surplus of 7,000 calories over and above what you normally eat. So please get that little negative, that little chatter out of your brain. The scale is not showing you body fat percentages. It's only showing you hydration levels. So when you're waking up in the morning and you're exhausted, by the way, you ever notice that a lot of people that are exhausted complain of headaches? Well, now you start to see the correlations, not causation, but there definitely could be a correlation between the two. So Start by consuming half your body weight in pounds in ounces. So 180 pounds, 180 pounds is what, Dan? 90, right?
Mhm. Yep.
So 90 ounces of water consumed. I'm getting my math all screwed up here. So if you weigh 200 pounds, you're going to be consuming 100 ounces of water. That's 10 ounces an hour over 10 hours. You guys grab your piece of paper and do the math. The most important part is we want to reverse engineer why you could be tired. Now look at just the first two things that we've spoken about here today, Dan. If somebody's not satisfying hunger, going to bed, and they're dehydrated, they have a headache, what is the quality of sleep going to be? And
Yeah,
one of the
pretty
things that
poor.
we haven't discussed is your body never gets a chance to physically and mentally recover until you get into those deep sleep levels, REM 3. On the Garmin, it's the dark blue. So do you see how people get frustrated and they have a tendency to go look for an outside source like caffeine or nicotine or something to stimulate them in the morning? Not necessary. Start with food, satisfying hunger, get some sleep, and make sure that you're properly hydrated. And we're only on variable number 2.
So
I hope
before
this
we
is encouraging a lot of our listeners. Yeah.
before we go to variable number 3, I just real quick.
Yeah.
I know for myself, it makes myself feel better when I step on the scale in the morning because I'm lighter, right?
Yep.
In the evening, I'm usually 3 to 4, 5 pounds heavier. But does it matter when you weigh? I mean, it's really just a baseline, correct? If you're used to weighing yourself at night, if you're keeping track of your weight loss, right? Of what
Yeah.
is it better to I would assume it's best to take your weight at the same time every day, regardless if it's morning or evening.
Well, if it's logistically possible, but yeah, the closer on the consistency, the better, because then you're factoring out any variables. The whole idea is this: get up in the morning, empty your bladder. If you can go to the restroom, great. That's just going to help clean out the large intestine. The key is to try to make it the same every day, to your point. And then before you go to bed, empty your bladder, step on the scale. So like Michaela and I, we have our scale right in the bathroom that we literally have to step over it to get out of the restroom. So it's just an easy reminder. But you made a very important comment. When you're trying to evaluate body fat loss, only use tape measures and calipers. Do not use the scale. The morning weight is going to show you inflammation and swelling from either exercise or food sensitivities, and the evening weight is only going to show you hydration. I'll give you a perfect example. If you have a digital scale and you're properly hydrated, it's going to show your percentage of body fat is higher because it's using electric impedance to shoot through the body fat of your feet. Well, if you're dehydrated, voila, you're going to be down 2 or 3 percentage points. Please do not pay attention to digitals. Use calipers and tape measures. We suggest doing that every 6 to 8 weeks. Use the scale in the morning and the evening to make sure that you're hydrated. We also want to use that body weight in the morning. If you are having food sensitivities, let's catch it, because this could also be contributing to why you're tired. And hopefully now we're turning the dominoes. Instead of them going the wrong way, we're turning them the right way.
Yep. Thank you for clarifying.
Absolutely.
Variable number 3, being sick. When your immune system is suppressed, you can
Yep.
definitely feel tired.
Well, and this is, again, a compounding issue. You've only got one gas tank of energy. So when you're listening to this podcast, your body may have killed 50, 60 viruses yesterday and you didn't even realize it, until your body is so fatigued that it can't fight the virus. Because think about it like a portfolio pie chart. You keep cutting your day up between school and work and family and all the obligations that you have. And if the body gets invaded by a microbe, you may have a low-grade fever and not realize it. So if you look at the first couple points that we've spoken about here, not getting enough sleep and being dehydrated, it just makes the sickness start to gain more and more momentum. And when you're busy, you're trying to get to some big presentation, this becomes a double-edged sword, because what happens to our appetite when we become sick? It goes down. So here we are trying to eat to satisfy hunger, to go to bed. We now don't have an appetite because we're sick, and now the dominoes are going the wrong way. I hate to always use a negative example, but I think people resonate. Yeah, I've been there, bought that t-shirt before. Oh, what I can do to reverse it. So by the way, for those of you that have a Garmin, pay attention to your resting heart rate in the morning. If we see more than a 3 to 5 beat deviation, you should always stop and ask yourself, what would be the catalyst for that? could possibly be a workout. It could be you had a long day at work. But if you look at just the first two things that we've spoken about here today, it could be not enough food. It could be not enough sleep. It could be not enough hydration. And because of that, you're feeling the way that you do. See, that's why we wanted to title this, What Actually is Tired? How many people wouldn't think that dehydration would contribute to being tired?
Yeah.
But when you're dehydrated, you have more and more internal heat, which creates more and more sweating. And then you have higher level of dehydration. And now you're exhausted. It's just vicious.
Let's move into variable 4, because variable 4 kind of coincides with variable 3 a little bit,
Yep.
and that's electrolyte imbalances. And
Yep.
I think a lot of people, when they hear like electrolyte, right, they think of Gatorade or some type of sports drink, but that's
Absolutely.
not necessarily exactly what we're talking about.
No. And I want to, for those of you that are taking notes, I appreciate you doing that for yourself. This is very important. Electrolytes bring a lot of attention back to the importance of food. Now, when Dan, to your point, most people think of an electrolyte associated with a sports drink. And I want you to, on your piece of paper, to write down the two purposes, or the two functions rather, of electrolytes. Number one, electrolytes help us absorb fluids. So if you ever drink a sports drink, like I have a company called Energy Fuel, and if you drink the Energy Fuel, you're going to notice that you urinate more, because the electrolytes help. It's what we call the osmolality, your ability to absorb fluids. So whenever you drink a sports drink, those electrolytes help you absorb fluids, and it's very important, because that's what we use in the form of sweat, not trying to insult anyone's intelligence. So that's the purpose of an electrolyte on that side of the equation. The other side of the equation is electrolytes play a significant role in muscle contraction. A lot of people don't understand that. So when you look at muscle contraction, and I don't want to bore everybody, but when you look at electrolytes, there's a lot of pairing, like sodium and potassium work together, calcium and magnesium work together, chloride and phosphorus work together. They all work in conjunction with one another that allows us to have stronger muscle contraction, strength. The more you can keep those electrolytes saturated in the tissue, you have muscular endurance. You see how this is? People are saying, man, I'm exhausted. I'm not talking about muscular endurance to be able to run a marathon. I'm talking about the muscular endurance to get through a day of work and make it to your son or daughter's karate practice. I want people to change their perspective on electrolytes. Electrolytes help you absorb fluids, and electrolytes help with muscle contraction. Now the muscles are sliding and gliding because they're hydrated, and they have the necessary micronutrients that facilitate muscle contraction. Why do we put it into the importance of the category of food? We only get our electrolytes through fruits and vegetables. And I don't want that to sound condescending at all. When you hear me say, I want your food to always surround fruits, vegetables, and lean protein sources. Now, if you want me to get highly technical, fruits, vegetables, and lean protein are low glycemic. If that's your buzzword, check. If you look at balancing the acidity and the pH level between eating animal products and fruits and vegetables, you're going to have the right ratio of alkalinity to pH levels. How's that? Check, if that's your wheelhouse. All right.
And I want to go ahead, Coach.
No, go right ahead, bud.
I wanted to bring this back into the variable 3 of being sick and eating
Yes.
fruits and vegetables. When you're not getting the appropriate nutrients from your fruits and vegetables and your lean protein, how does that, that's obviously a electrolyte imbalance, but how does that affect you being sick?
What people don't realize is when I say to you, hey, make sure you eat a lot of protein, they immediately think that's to rebuild muscle mass, which of course it's true. Specifically, you're extracting amino acids out of your protein. That's what rebuilds the muscle. Many people don't realize your immune system thrives on protein. When you look at a micronutrient such as electrolytes or vitamin C, D, or E, or whatever you want to bring up into the equation, I guess the best way to think about it is think about your blood panel results and all the different variables that they capture and analyze. The immune system is only able to stay strong when it has the building blocks: vitamins, minerals, and macronutrients. So I always like to keep nutrition very simple because people like to convolute it. Every chance you get when you make a plate of something, have a presence of a fruit, a vegetable, and a lean source of protein. That's going to strengthen the immune system from a building block standpoint. And then on the other side of the equation is when you reduce stress through sleep, the building blocks from food complement, because think about what happens when we go to sleep. Our respiration rate slows down, our brain waves start to slow down. There's the least amount of stress on the body. Well, now all of these building elements can actually go do their job. I don't want this to be a rhetorical comment, but this is why if you don't satisfy hunger and you don't fall into deep sleep, people get frustrated because they're gaining body fat, even though they're going to the gym and exercising and they're eating cleanly. Well, your body never releases the hormones, human growth hormone and testosterone. They play a significant role in making you leaner and allowing you to recover from the stress of a day. Notice I didn't say from your workout. That's one component of the typical day. I'm talking about recovering from work, family, finances, those 4 quadrants that we talk so much about. Your immune system is completely and 100% directly related to how much food, quality and quantity, with the amount of quality and quantity of sleep. Dan, you and I have talked about this off the record. I've got athletes that haven't been sick for years. It's not me. All I can do is encourage them. What strengthens your immune system? Eating and sleeping. Well, what should I eat? Fruits, vegetables, and protein. How much should I sleep? A minimum of 8, preferably 9. How do I evaluate if it's working? Look at your sleep rate. Look at your sleep reports on Garmin. How quickly are you falling into deep sleep? How long are you staying there? And how many sleep cycles that you're getting? And there becomes the foundation. That's why we're talking the first half of this podcast today. We've got to talk about the foundation of health before we ever look at athleticism. And like you said, what are the only 2 things that are going to slow us down as an athlete? Getting sick or getting injured. So that's why I'm glad you brought it back to the sickness question, because most people think of protein as only rebuilding muscles, but it plays a significant role in the strength of the immune system as well.
Well, that's going to be a good lead into variable number 4, and that's anemia. And I think when people first hear the word anemia, they think of meat, right? That they're not eating enough meat, red meat, lean red meat, and that's why they're anemic, low iron. How does that affect being tired? And I guess my other question is, there's a lot of listeners, including my wife, that's a vegetarian, but they don't eat lean red meat. So could you talk about maybe the benefit of eating the lean red meat, and then maybe if you're not a meat eater, what you can do to make sure that you don't get anemic?
Yeah. So let's explain what anemia is. And if you have a piece of paper, it might be easier to write it down so that you can kind of visually see how this works. When you eat a food product and it has a high level of iron in it, iron then saturates the blood. Iron is essentially a precursor to hemoglobin in the blood, and hemoglobin is the element of the blood that carries oxygen. So if we come back to the overall subject of today's podcast, why am I tired? Well, if you have low iron levels in your blood, that means you're not able to carry as much oxygen in the blood. And with less and less oxygen, we feel more fatigued. Now, if we have a female that's listening who has a heavy menstrual cycle or one that's very lengthy, as you lose more and more blood, you're essentially losing more and more iron, less and less oxygen. That's why you feel so exhausted when you're on your menstrual cycle. If you're a male or you're a female that's not on your menstrual cycle, you need to realize that every day when you walk down the street and your heel touches the ground, you're breaking down red blood cells. So those red blood cells have to be rejuvenated. For those that consider themselves athletic, the more you exercise, the more you break down the red blood cells. So what happens is we become in a state of, we become anemic from one of 2 reasons. Either we're not eating enough food that is iron rich, or our exercise levels is depleting it at a rate that's faster than what we can offset with food. Very important. The reason why we advocate consuming high quality red meat is the bioavailability of iron is the highest from high quality red meat. Now, for the sake of the vegetarians that are out there, there's a plethora of books and resources, and depending on how long you've been a vegetarian, you've probably already educated yourself on how to extrapolate and combine, or excuse me, how to combine your food so that your body does extrapolate the amount of iron that it needs. I'm not going to go here on this podcast and say that I would suggest supplementation of iron because you can get to a lethal level of toxicity. So I always recommend you go to your physician if you think that iron supplementation is necessary, whether you're vegan or whether you're not. I personally, I think it's a lot of work to do it as a vegetarian. I don't judge it. I know people have their reasons for not eating meat, but I would encourage you to do your own self-research and make sure that you're getting enough iron. Make sure that you're getting your blood work done on a regular basis. I'd suggest maybe no more than 3 to 4 months at a time, because low levels of iron in the blood will definitely make you feel exhausted. So anemia is a real big one. And I wanted to make sure that people understand we're still on the subject of the importance of food, right? When we look at that first element of food, getting electrolytes, most people think food is going to give me protein, carbs, and fat. Yeah, you're right. Those are your 3 macronutrients. They're also going to give you the micronutrients, vitamins and minerals. Well, vitamins and minerals allow the body to be able to burn macronutrients. Dan, you and I have talked about this on the podcast before. If we go camping, we can't take a match and light a log on fire. We have to use the kindling. The kindling is vitamins and minerals. The macronutrients, carbs, protein, and fat, they can only burn when the catalyst of energy is there. I do want to say this, and I'm going to run the risk of offending people. When somebody tells you to strip a food group out of your everyday eating, please don't do that unless you've validated that you have a reason not to eat it. Like if you have celiac disease, yes, you need to be gluten-free. But please do not let somebody on social media that wants to go out and declare, hey, strip a food group out because it has a high level of sugar. Please look beyond the sugar content. I'm not asking you to just eat a banana. A banana's high in sugar. I'm asking you to put a dollop of almond butter on there or some other form of protein that goes with it. Do a piece of Swiss cheese with an apple, protein and fat with a high quality apple, low glycemic apple. Always combine your foods, but please never strip a food group out, because what is it you strip? Vitamins, minerals, and macronutrients. What do you expect the body to rebuild itself with? Dan, you and I have teased about this. You hire me to build a house, and I only bring enough wood to build half the house that you want built. How do you expect me to build the house if I don't bring enough materials?
Right.
Well, how do you expect the body to recover? How do you expect it to heal, get stronger, get healthy? And what we're talking about today, dig out from being fatigued, give the body what it needs. Please stop listening. And by the way, this is where the Garmin comes in. I'm not going to sit here and tell you how many calories to consume. Use your Garmin. It's telling you what are you burning in activity and what are you burning on a daily basis to stay alive. They refer to it as resting. Sorry, Dan, just want to make sure people understand. There's no speculation when you're using Garmin.
One thing I wanted to ask about, maybe touch on real quick before we move to variable number 6,
yes,
is lean red meat and being anemic. I think you want, and back me up, and if I'm wrong, please let me know I'm wrong, but there's so much going on with our meat these days and where you're getting your meat. I think it's very important to find a local butcher or somewhere where you know where that meat is coming from versus the big box stores where you have no idea what's in the meat, where it's coming from. Am I correct, Rob? I mean, you want to make sure you're eating good quality lean red meat instead of stuff that's pumped full of, steroids and God knows what else they pump in those animals.
100%. I mean, especially when you can shop local, I think that's always, especially when you're dealing with fruits and vegetables. It's interesting when you're looking for meat products locally. Obviously, you're going to need to know what kind of neighbors you have, and are they really, whether it be for the ethics of the animal or the environment that they're in, and are they truly, keeping the grounds clean as they say they are. This is why I have such an affinity towards Angus Beef Company. And if you look at Angus, what I love about them as a company is the fact that they are so proud of what they do. They are very, very particular on what they stamp as Angus certified. Now, for me, I'm extremely busy. Dan, I know you're busy, and I know a lot of our listeners are busy. As the old saying goes, right? You get what you pay for. I myself like the Angus beef brand because what they're doing is essentially the homework for me that I don't have time to do. I'm like, if they're going to go and spend the time and they go and they seek, where these animals are raised, and they have a very strict standard. So for me, I don't have a lot of money. I have a very frugal food budget like everybody else does. To me, I'm willing to pay more for the Angus beef brand, because to me, they've done exactly what you just articulated, Dan. They've gone out and made sure that if they're going to put a stamp on it, it's going to meet a certain level of criteria, and it won't be jeopardized. Because the people that want to be in business with Angus to be able to be a supplier, they know if they are not telling the truth, they're going to cut themselves off.
Right.
So I always want you to start with local, especially on the fruits and vegetables side. Like for some of the people that are in the city, they may not be able to find somebody that has, their own cattle that they're raising, or chickens, or whatever the animal may be. That's where, like you said, Dan, if you do have to shop at a regular store, read the labels very carefully. Do research on the companies you do business with. I have a very big affinity towards Vans Foods. If you follow me on social media, I do Vans waffles. I may put fruit on it. I may put almond butter on it. I may put peanut butter on it. I mean, the idea here is I go and research. The Vans are gluten-free, and yeah, they're a little bit more expensive, but I'm not falling asleep at my desk after I eat them because of the high quality. But you bring up a really good point when it comes to food selection, for sure.
Okay, number 6. I'm going to let you run with this one, Coach. No warm up. What does that mean?
Well, as we get ready to transition into the subject of athleticism, I want everybody who's listening to this who does not consider themselves athletic, when you wake up in the morning and let's just say that hypothetically you're in a deep sleep of REM 3. That's also known as, those can be interchangeable. REM 3 is deep sleep. And that alarm goes off, and you wake up and you've got a foggy head, and you're frustrated that you're trying to get in the car and get to work. You're trying to catch the bus to get to work. And you're like sitting there and you're absolutely exhausted. Well, it's because you literally woke yourself up from a deep sleep. Let's go back to young children. You ever get ready to go on a vacation, or your son or daughter fell asleep and you're trying to get them to wake up, and they literally are almost like they're comatose because they're in a deep level of sleep? When did the rules change? As we became older, we think, all right, I'm going to set my alarm for 6, and by 6:15, I'm going to be on my treadmill. And then you get on there and you're like, I'm so exhausted. No, your body is still asleep. Stop and think about that. And just to put it in the context, depending on when you're listening to this podcast, if you're listening to this during the day, right now, pause this video, pause this podcast, and go run around the block as fast as you can. Your body's not warmed up. It's kind of been acclimated to sitting at your desk or sitting at home, ambient air temperature, all the variables are controlled. Take that exact scenario right now and move that to going to bed. You're nice and tucked in, you're in deep sleep, you're dreaming about being at the beach, eating some good food, and then that startle alarm goes off, and you're like, all right, I'm dedicated to exercise. I'm going to get on that treadmill or your spin bike or whatever you're doing. You are still half asleep, literally. But you throw it under the umbrella that you're tired. No, you were almost sleepwalking. And I've walked this through with thousands of athletes and people who don't even consider themselves athletic. The world of physiology, you cannot outfox it. So please keep that in mind. Look at those first 6 variables, Dan.
Yep.
A lot of people think they're tired and they want to go run and get an upper, or they want to get caffeine or nicotine or some kind of lift me up, when really what they need to do is hydrate, sleep, and eat, and then try to wake up. That's what if you study circadian rhythms, try to wake up without an alarm. I know that may seem idealistic to a lot of people, but make it a priority. Go to bed early enough so that your body can get 8 hours and cortisol levels will naturally rise, and then you wake up without an alarm. That's very, very important. I don't think people understand a lot of the body fat issues that we deal with is because we keep getting woken up while we're still in deep sleep. You've got to be able to get those growth hormones, HGH and testosterone, those have got to be released.
Got to get back to basics.
Isn't it interesting how it always comes back full circle?
Yeah. Okay, let's get into the athletic variables of being tired. And I want to paint a picture here. I'm a motocross guy. Most of you guys know I'm a motocross guy now. You're out there, you're doing a 20-minute moto, you're doing 2-minute lap times, say, right? And all of a sudden your lap times start falling off by 2-3 seconds. That would be an indication, right, that you're getting tired, Coach. So So the first variable of being athletically tired, mentally fatigued, that could mean so much. So walk us through being mentally fatigued as an athlete.
Absolutely. You just gave a really good example. For those of you that may not follow us in the motocross industry, when you're riding a motorcycle, your processing of the objects that you're running over, things that you're hitting like jumps, rollers, setting yourself up, transitioning from gas to brake to get into a corner and get out of the corner. We call it riding a moving gyroscope. You're trying to predict what the bike's going to do based on how you have it set up. And we all want to be faster. Now, if you're not someone who rides motorcycles, this could be applicable to riding your bicycle, riding a skateboard, wakeboarding, football, soccer, doesn't really matter. We all want to be faster. The faster you go, the quicker you drain your liver. If you're new to our podcast, on your piece of paper, your body stores sugar in two what we call gas tanks in your body. The liver feeds the brain and the muscles feed movement. Now let's go back to what you were just saying, Dan. You're out there, you're working with a riding coach, and they're working on something that's very difficult technically, and at the same time, you're increasing your speed. So the brain goes from being able to process 30 miles an hour of input to 32 to 34 to 36 to 40. The faster you go, Dan, it's no different than if you're driving in your truck. You're going to get better gas mileage at 60 miles an hour than you are at 80. Well, we want to be able to go as fast as we physically can, not realizing that our brain is starting to run out of gas, literally the liver's becoming depleted. And then we start to become mentally fatigued and we go, man, I need to get in shape. I'm exhausted. No, you're mentally exhausted. I'm not saying that you're not physically, but I just want to differentiate this first variable. People get confused when they go, what do you mean I'm mentally tired? For those of you that follow moto, we've had the privilege of working with Jeff Ward. And when he went into the IRL kart racing, imagine coming out of turn number one at 220, 230 miles an hour. He says, you're already looking at the next corner because within a half a second, you're literally into turn number two. Think about that processing speed, a quarter of an inch off the wall at 200 plus miles an hour. You think that your brain's not going to be tired? Now let's take that to people who aren't at Jeff Ward's level. Let's talk about the reality of we all just want to be faster. We're not faster because what has hurt us? We're not faster because our brain, the only gas tank it can rely on is on empty. If the gas tank is on empty, we're going to be quote unquote tired. And because we're tired, what do? We go to the gym and we try working out harder, and we're not putting the focus at all where our emphasis needs to be. Now, before we go any further, Dan, I want all the listeners to go back and look at the first 5 points. Don't even worry about running around the block. Look at the first 5 points. If you show up to the track and you're hungry, if you show up to the track and you're tired, you show up to the track and you're dehydrated, how many guys go, man, I'm just not in shape to ride? No, you just didn't show up prepared. That's what I want to encourage our listeners. It's like, if you'll focus on those first 5 variables, you'll be faster athletically. And you don't even have to try harder. Dan, let's go back to the motorcycle. You and I go buy a brand new KX450F and we put a rusty chain on it. You can feel that chain robbing the body of power. Well, that's just like a muscle that's dehydrated.
Yeah.
But as an athlete, we go, man, I've got to get in shape. No, you need to get hydrated.
Well, and this might be the most important one as well.
Yeah.
Is being, mentally prepared and not fatigued, because that's where you make mistakes, and mistakes on a motocross track leads to injury, and that's not good for anybody. So
yeah,
I think being mentally refreshed, ready to go is probably the most important.
It really is, because obviously we're talking on the subject of moto, right? How many minute details is a riding coach telling you to do, to implement, to look for, to prepare, to offset, and then take that to a ball and stick sport. If you're trying to throw the ball and you don't have your elbow high enough, you're not going to get the throw, or your elbow's not high enough and you got to hit. The coach is telling you, the specialist is telling you some minute details, and you're literally mentally drained. So you keep dropping your elbow, or you're wakeboarding and your eyes aren't looking far enough ahead, or you're not preloading the lip of the wake, or whatever it may be. So do you see this compounding problem? A riding coach, a sports specialist is getting frustrated that you're not getting anything out of it. That's why I always try to back the train up. Please, as a human performance specialist, please stop yelling at the athlete that they're doing something wrong if you as a performance coach haven't validated that they showed up. Like when I do trackside performance camps, I'm assuming, and I mandate, please do not waste my time and show up to do an open water swim lesson or to do a motocross training session at the track. Please don't show up if you're dehydrated, haven't eaten in 8 hours, and you're running on 4 hours of sleep. You're wasting your money and I'm wasting my time.
You're really setting yourself up for failure.
Well, and like you said, failure that leads to injury. And what we say earlier, what's the two things that holds us back from progressing? Sickness or illness. Sickness, illness, then an injury. Oops. And it could be avoided.
Number 2, this hits close to home for me, Coach Robb. Being out of breath. Come back from a 20-minute moto and you're gassed. That's a definite sign of being tired.
Yeah, 100%. And this is where I want to go back to what we were saying earlier when we look at food and we looked at you looking at your body weight in the morning and the evening. When we're starting to look at athletic capabilities, if you guys are watching this on YouTube, I want you to look at the screen real quick. Imagine that circle is a cell membrane. That cell membrane can carry a certain amount of oxygen. Well, as I become dehydrated, the cell surface becomes progressively smaller and smaller. So here we were talking about foundation of health, being hydrated, eliminating headaches, sleeping better, having more energy. Then we come down, you show up to do something athletically. A lot of people are like, man, I got gassed. I got to go to the gym. I got to work more cardio. That could be the case. That's where the heart rate monitor comes in. That's another whole analysis in itself. If you showed up to the track and we know that you're hydrated because you weighed the same amount, give or take a very small deviation in the morning, we know you're hydrated. Or excuse me, we know that you're not loaded with a bunch of inflammation and swelling, so there's no anomalies there. You're consuming the amount of water per hour that you need to be properly hydrated. You're snacking on fruits and vegetables that are high in water and electrolytes necessary for muscle contraction. I now know that when you're running out of breath, that's more fitness related, not dehydration. If a cell membrane is getting smaller and smaller and you're training with a heart rate monitor, you will go slower at a higher heart rate because there's less and less oxygen in the blood. For those of you that ride motorcycles and have a carburetor, it's like we're squeezing the air fuel tube and the motor's it wants more, or you're riding at altitude and there's just not enough air fuel mixture. What does that do to the horsepower of the bike? Robs it. And that's exactly what we're noticing right here. You're getting tired at the track and you're running out of breath. Sure, it could be muscular endurance. It could be raw power. My experience has been, remember I said earlier, people are stepping over $1 to pick up a penny. They think weighing themselves twice a day is too much work, but they'll spend $10,000 on a set of A-kit forks. I don't understand it.
That's because they look cool, Rob. They look cool.
Well, they look cool, but think about this. How stiff are those A-kit suspension?
Very.
So now you have a dehydrated muscle that's creating more and more heat. And then the athlete goes, oh, I got to get in better shape. No, you just need to simply get hydrated. If you're not hydrated, you'll never slide and glide. You'll never use the forks to their advantage. And yes, all of us could be stronger. All of us could work on our cardio. I don't care who you are. We all could be better. But when you're jumping into A-kit suspension and you're bypassing daily hydration, you see what I said earlier? It doesn't cost any money, just attention to details. Not that the A-kit's free, but we're in athleticism now.
Yep. Number 3, you kind of touched on it, muscular fatigue. Obviously, you come in, you've put in laps at the pool, you've ran, track, your legs are tired, your arms are tired, you're feeling it, right? You're feeling it in your muscles.
But we want to go back to what we said earlier. Somebody who during the day is already dehydrated, somebody who goes to bed every night and they're a little bit lighter and they're excited, not realizing that they're essentially dehydrated. Now we go back to the initial illustration. The muscles don't slide and glide. So there's more friction, which creates more heat. What does heat do to anything? Robs it of power. Now take a step further. When the muscle becomes, let's kind of go more the positive approach. You showed up, Dan, today at the track and you're hydrated and you're fed. You've been snacking on fruits and vegetables. Electrolyte levels are high, so the muscle contraction is super strong because everything's topped off. Well, when that starts, just like a motor, right? The more we turn that throttle, the more exhaust we have coming out the back. The heavier we step on the gas pedal of the car, the more exhaust goes out the back. But as we step on the gas, as we twist the throttle, we use more and more fuel. So now we come back to, if you show up dehydrated, if you show up not snacking all day with low blood sugar, the brain can't think because it has not an insufficient amount of sugar. The muscles, they're contracting really strong initially until they become depleted. And people go, man, I got to get fit. No, you need to be hydrated and you need to graze on items that are high in the things that you need: water and electrolytes, macronutrients, carbs, protein, and fat, foundation of energy. That's all we're trying to get across here.
Number 4, Coach, you're gonna have to probably explain a little bit more on this one. But racing beyond your lactate tolerance, what exactly does that mean?
Well, if anybody, and even if you don't consider yourself an athlete, it still applies to you. Where's that point where you feel really, really good and you bump up the intensity and all of a sudden you cross that line and you're like, you just explode? That's what we would refer to as lactate threshold, anaerobic threshold. As the word implies, you're working at a point where you no longer have the presence of oxygen in your blood, anaerobic. What I want people to understand is you can improve your lactate tolerance by knowing where that number begins. And we call it the upper side of a heart rate zone. So when you start to get close to that upper range, you can train that. That's why it's called lactate tolerance. If you know at what point you're about to cross into the no man's land, because Dan, the best example I could give you is you and I run a 5K and the gun goes off and everybody just runs away from us. And then you can just see they blow up and they come backwards. They've crossed that anaerobic threshold, that lactate tolerance. Now, for those of you that are scientists and physical therapists, no, I do recognize that lactate tolerance and anaerobic threshold, they are different in a clinical setting. But for the sake of this podcast, what we're talking about, Dan, is hitting a point where once you cross it, you're going to have to slow down. In the moto world, this would be considered throwing anchor, right? You're out there, you're hammering, and then you just see the elbows drop, the athlete's sitting more, they're not going full send mode. The reason why it's important here is, and again, I'm going to go back to the Garmin. With all of my clients, we do a max heart rate assessment specific to every discipline that we do, and we create heart rate zones specific to that discipline, and then you train accordingly to that. So again, we go back to the idea, why are you tired? Why are you throwing anchor on race day? Because you're trying to race at a level that you haven't trained. You should be training at a level that makes racing feel easy. How many times have we heard guys like Ricky Carmichael in the moto world, or we've heard Lionel Sanders, or we've in the triathlon world, or we've heard Zeb over in the marathon side of the world, right? What we're trying to do is make sure that we don't ever get to a point where we cross that threshold and blow up. What all these experts, what these guys that have been so accomplished have always said is race day is the easiest day of the week because you've worked. I'm not saying you smoke yourself every day. It's what we call the familiarity principle. You've associated yourself, you've trained the body. How much oxygen does it need? Can it convert stored sugar to energy? Can it dissipate the heat? Does it have enough electrolytes for muscle contraction, i.e. your sweat rate? If we test that, that's why I say you train here, race here. Racing should be familiar because you're racing at an intensity that's adjusted to the duration, and you should finish stronger than you started. That's a key takeaway right there.
And that's why you see Eli Tomac on the top step of the podium looks like he hasn't even run a moto or a main event and looks fresh after he just won the race. He's prepared himself for that moment. The last one, number 5, soft tissue resistance.
Yep. It just goes back to everything that we've talked about. If a muscle's hydrated, if it's got the electrolyte saturation, you're not taking the heart rate above what you're capable of, i.e. you did not go anaerobic and the tissues are sliding and gliding. A lot of guys are like, oh, I'm getting tired easy. No, the muscles have so much internal friction. Because heat robs the body of energy just like a motor does. So that's why we wanted to look at this athletic tired. Are you mentally drained? Could be. Are you out of breath? Well, if you are, that could be a fitness issue, but a lot of times it's because the cell membrane is getting smaller because you're dehydrated. When we look at muscular fatigue, if you're not snacking and grazing on fruits and vegetables, you're now electrolyte depleted. We look at the idea that you don't know at what point you can race or train up to without going anaerobic. And then the muscles, they all are sticky. And so now we have a higher core body temperature. We end up losing energy. And people get frustrated and go, I just get tired every time I exercise. Well, if you go back to the beginning of the podcast, everything's hinges off those first 5 variables. Then you add these next 5 variables and you make it a priority. Now we can start talking about sport specific setup, technique, strategy, because this is just autopilot. We're waking up every day. We know what to eat, how much and when. We know how much fluid. And when we balance the stress, we get enough sleep. Remember what the definition of overtraining is. And today, let's replace that word, Dan, with overtraining. Why do I wake up tired every day? Because you didn't absorb what you did yesterday, whatever the it may be, personally, professionally, athletically. And there closes the whole loop on what exactly is being tired mean. So hopefully that's made some sense to our listeners here today.
It really just boils down to that we got to get back to basics. We really overcomplicate things, and it really is very simple. And I think it really just takes effort, Coach Robb, that you got to put the effort forward to eat properly. You got to put the effort forward to make sure you're drinking the amount of liquid that you need to be drinking to keep hydrated. You need to get the sleep. I mean, it's really simple stuff that we overthink. We get so busy in our daily lives that we don't take the time to make sure. I mean, I'm to the point, Coach Robb, where I have to literally measure out my water. I have to keep track of I've got a jug that holds 100 ounces of water. I'm 200 pounds right now, and I have to measure it out, and I have to force myself to drink that amount of water. And I think that it's basic stuff. We have to put forward the effort if we want to get to the next step to be athletic, athletes at the highest level.
And I think what's important is what you said is you have a quantified number. That's what we love about doing this podcast is let's talk about the concept. You need to be hydrated. How much? Half your body weight in ounces of water spread out through the day. How do I know my heart rate zones? Well, use our heart rate calculator. And what I want, especially for those that are new, if you're watching this on YouTube, please go to the description box. We have a link to all those resources that we just referenced. We have the heart rate spreadsheet. We have the sweat rate calculator. Please, there's no charge for these. That's not why we do these podcasts. Dan, thank you so much for taking over this co-host of this show, because my passion project has always been let's debunk the plethora of misinformation that's floating around. I have nothing to sell you, nothing. But what I love doing is listening to people's frustrations. That's why we do a video a day. If you have the time, every single day here on YouTube, I post a video where I have answered a question that has come into our offices. Nobody wants to see me talk, but what I will promise you is that I will address, and they could be as far-fetched as, to me, there's no boundaries. Food poisoning, and should I warm up, and is there a right way to stretch, or should I stretch, or should I not? There is no boundaries. So please, if you're new, like and subscribe to the channel. It's not a sales pitch, and come back every day or turn on those notifications, because every single day we're going to be dropping a video. And just like this podcast, we just want people to become more educated. You've got your own notes, you've got your own calculations, get after it. And if you have questions, Dan, if you don't mind, have everybody send it to me at contact@coachrob.com. That goes directly to Jennifer. She deciphers the information in regards to category. If we don't know the immediate answer, we'll research it. We'll answer your question, and we'll convert it into a video. Right now, we're sitting at a little over 3,000 questions that we will be answering one day at a time until there are no answers. But Dan, I want to say to everybody, thank you for watching. And Dan, thank you again for your time, man. It's been a great show.
Yep. And make sure you guys like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Instagram, the Coach Robb Podcast. Follow Coach Robb individually. Coach Robb, a lot of useful information, like he talked about those videos daily. Coach Robb, that's my favorite part of the morning, waking up. I wake up and I get to see your pretty face every morning, and you answer one of my questions. So thank you guys all. Coach Robb, thank you, and we'll see you guys next time.
Take care, guys. Thank you so much.